The cuffs snapped onto her wrist as the so-called cop smirked. "Nice try, sweetheart. Fake badge won't save you." Then she saw it, his badge. It wasn't real, and he had no idea he'd just arrested the worst possible person. What happened next? No one saw coming. Detective Valerie Carter had spent her morning buried in case files at the precinct. As the lead investigator on a high-stakes corruption probe, she had seen plenty of criminals try to play cop. She just never expected to be the target of one. Stepping out for a quick coffee break, she barely made it across the street when a police cruiser screeched to a halt beside her. The driver's door swung open and a white man, mid-40s, stepped out in a police uniform. Something about him felt off, too eager, too aggressive, like he was performing for an audience. "Hands where I can see them," he barked, voice sharp with authority he hadn't earned. Valerie frowned. "Excuse me?" "You fit the description of a theft suspect," he snapped, already reaching for his cuffs. Her pulse spiked. She had seen this too many times, black individuals getting harassed for simply existing. But today, the victim was her. Calmly, she pulled out her badge. "I'm Detective Carter, NYPD. Step back." The man hesitated, scanning her face, her badge, her stance. Then, instead of backing off, he laughed. "That's cute. Fake badge? You think that's gonna work?" His hand lashed out before she could react, yanking her wrist and twisting it behind her back. Pain shot through her shoulder. "I said, back off!" she snapped, driving her heel into his shin. A real cop would have stopped, reassessed, asked questions. Not this man. He doubled down, shoving her toward the open cruiser door, his grip tightening. Valerie fought back, twisting against his hold, but her mind was already racing past the physical fight. Something didn't add up. His reaction was too erratic. His uniform, too clean, too stiff. Then she saw it. His badge, it read, Police Auxiliary. Her blood ran cold. Not a real cop. A fraud. And he had no idea he had just made the worst mistake of his life. Still pinned against the car, Valerie forced her breathing to steady. Pain pulsed through her shoulder, but she ignored it. This wasn't just about her anymore. She locked eyes with the man gripping her wrist. "You're not a real cop." The words hit harder than expected. His nostrils flared. "Oh yeah? And you're not a real detective." She almost laughed. He was trying to hold on to control, but cracks were already showing. His grip wasn't as tight anymore, his bravado starting to crumble. Her fingers twitched with the need to flip this situation, but she needed more. A name, an opening. She tilted her head, voice controlled. "What precinct are you with?" The fake cop smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Nice try." That was confirmation enough. No real officer hesitates to state their precinct. Then, from the crowd, a voice. "I don't think that's a real officer." It was a woman, her brows knit together in suspicion. Another voice joined in. "Yeah, something's off." The murmurs spread like wildfire. Faces turned from passive onlookers to skeptics. Valerie saw it, the flicker of doubt in his eyes. His grip faltered, just slightly, but that was all she needed. She moved. Using the leverage of his own overconfidence, she twisted her body sharply, yanking her arm free while stepping into his space. Off balance, he stumbled backward, arms flailing. Then, bam! He hit the pavement hard. Before he could react, Valerie was on him, knee pressing into his back, securing his wrists with the same force he had used on her. "Stay down," she ordered. The crowd leaned in now, no longer silent spectators but engaged witnesses. She reached for his belt, yanking out his wallet, flipping it open in one swift motion. Name, Roger Dunlap. Affiliation, none. Nothing. No department. No official ties. Busted. Valerie exhaled through her nose, forcing down the surge of anger that threatened to spill over. You're under arrest for impersonating an officer, unlawful detainment, and assaulting a detective, she declared, her voice ringing clear. Roger's face turned red, veins bulging at his temples. You can't. Oh, I can. She cut him off, already pulling out her phone. She hit dial. This is Detective Carter. I need backup on 5th and Lexington. We have a 10:33. Suspect in custody. Silence. Then the crowd erupted. She's a detective? She was telling the truth? Holy shit, he really ain't a cop? Roger's head jerked around, eyes darting for an escape route, but it was too late. Minutes later, the sound of sirens cut through the city noise. Real police officers arrived in crisp uniforms, their badges reflecting the midday sun. The moment they stepped onto the scene, the energy shifted. Authority had arrived. Sergeant Diaz, broad-shouldered and stone-faced, led the charge. His gaze flicked from Valerie, still standing over the suspect, to the restrained man on the pavement. Detective Carter? She gave a single nod, tossing Roger's wallet to him. Impersonator. Thought he could play cop today. Diaz caught it, flipping it open with a practiced motion. The moment his eyes landed on the ID, his expression darkened. Roger Dunlap. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Son of a bitch. He's been on our watch list. Roger's body jerked slightly, like a trapped animal sensing the walls closing in, his face drained of color. This is a mistake, he blurted. Diaz crouched beside him, voice dripping with dry amusement. No, see, the mistake was laying hands on an actual detective. One of the uniformed officers stepped forward, offering Valerie a hand. She took it, pushing herself to her feet. You okay, detective? She rolled her shoulder, testing the joint. It still ached, but nothing was dislocated. Better now. Roger was yanked to his feet, wrists bound tight behind his back. His breath was coming in quick, shallow bursts, his mind scrambling for a way out. Then, in true cowardly fashion, he tried to twist the narrative. You can't do this. I was just doing my duty. People like her. Silence. It was instant, cold, and suffocating. Every officer in the vicinity stopped. Valerie barely had to glance around to see it. The hardening of jaws, the sharp exhales through flared nostrils, the collective tightening of grips on holsters and belts. Roger realized too late that he had seriously miscalculated. Valerie stepped in close, lowering her voice to something cold and cutting. People like me? She repeated, watching him squirm. You mean actual law enforcement? Roger's jaw clenched, but no words came out. You're just mad because you picked the wrong black woman to harass, she added, tilting her head. And now, you're going exactly where you belong. He opened his mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to beg, but nothing came, because the truth had already sealed his fate. The next morning, Valerie pushed through the precinct doors, the scent of fresh coffee mixing with the usual smell of paperwork, ink, and cheap department-issued carpet. The station was already alive with chatter, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, voices bouncing between desks. Just another day in law enforcement. She barely had time to take a sip of her coffee before Detective Reynolds waved her over from his desk. His smirk was the kind that said, "You're going to want to see this." "Check this out," he said, spinning his laptop around. A headline, bold and impossible to miss, blazed across the screen. Fake cop arrested after targeting off-duty black detective. Valerie raised an eyebrow, tilting her head slightly. The article was already racking up thousands of shares, comments flooding in. She scrolled down. News outlets had torn Roger Dunlap apart overnight. His history was now public knowledge. His past attempts at impersonating officers, his desperate need for control, the countless reports of him harassing innocent people under the guise of law and order. His online rants, dripping with entitlement, revealed his obsession with restoring authority and stopping those who, in his twisted mind, didn't belong. This wasn't just about one bad arrest. It was about exposing the type of man who wore a uniform not to protect, but to oppress. It wasn't just an arrest. It was a reckoning. Across the room, a few officers had already pulled up the article on their phones. Whispers spread like wildfire. Damn, they're eating this guy alive. I can't believe how many times he got away with this before. You see that footage? The way she flipped him like a damn pro? A few snickers followed. Even those who weren't talking about it were aware of it. And then came Diaz, strolling past like he hadn't been waiting for this exact moment. He stopped just long enough to smirk. You're a damn celebrity, Carter. Valerie didn't even look up. She took a slow sip of her coffee, shrugged. I just did what I always do, put criminals behind bars. The only difference was, this time, the whole world was watching.